A human mechanic's unthinkable remedy. Secrets of a failing starship's Medbay. The cargo freighter Volantis drifted through the empty space between star systems, its massive hull cutting through the darkness like a wounded beast. The ship was old, perhaps too old for the routes it still traveled, but the consortium that owned it cared more about profits than safety. For the 47 souls aboard, this was simply home, a place where they worked, ate, slept, and dreamed of better days. Marcus Chin stood in the engine room, his hands black with grease and his coveralls stained with a dozen different fluids that kept the ship running. He was the only human aboard the Volantis, a fact that still surprised him after 3 years of service. When he had first signed on, the Torvani captain had looked at him with those 4 yellow eyes and asked why a human would want to work on such a broken-down vessel. Marcus had simply shrugged and said he liked fixing things that others had given up on. The engine room was a mess of exposed wiring, patched conduits, and jury-rigged systems that would have made any proper engineer weep. But Marcus had learned to love this chaos. Every wire told a story, every patch was a battle won against the cold void that waited outside. He ran his calloused fingers along a coolant pipe he had repaired just last week, feeling the steady pulse of fluid flowing through it like blood through a vein. His communicator buzzed against his hip, and he pulled it free with a grunt. The small screen showed the face of Kira Voss, the ship's second-in-command. She was Torvani like the captain, with smooth blue skin and eyes that could see in spectrums humans could only dream of. Her expression was troubled, the small tendrils around her mouth twitching in the way Marcus had learned meant bad news. "Marcus, we need you in the Medbay," she said, her voice carrying the slight echo that Torvani vocal cords always produced. "There is a problem with the medical systems." Marcus wiped his hands on a rag that was already too dirty to clean anything properly. "What kind of problem? The regeneration pods acting up again?" Kira's tendrils twitched more violently. "It is worse than that. The entire Medbay is failing. Dr. Thessan says we have perhaps 2 days before the life support in that section goes completely dark. And we have patients who cannot be moved." The weight of those words settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical thing. He had been on ships where systems failed, where people died because a part broke or a wire corroded. He had seen the aftermath, the empty bunks and the silence that followed. He would not let that happen here, not on his watch. "I'm on my way," he said, already moving toward the door. "Tell Doc Thessan to keep everyone calm. I'll figure something out." The corridors of the Volantis were narrow and dim, the overhead lights flickering in that unsteady way that Marcus had never quite managed to fix. The ship was a patchwork of different technologies, built by the consortium from salvaged parts and outdated designs. Walking through it was like walking through history, each section telling the story of a different era of space travel. Marcus passed crew members as he walked, nodding to those he knew well and receiving nods in return. There was Grix, the massive Korthan who worked in cargo, his 4 arms carrying crates that would have crushed a human. There was Yenna, the small Feskari pilot whose wings folded against her back as she walked, her compound eyes tracking Marcus with curiosity. They all knew him, respected him in that way that people respect those who keep them alive in the void. The Medbay was located in the forward section of the ship, near the crew quarters where the air was supposed to be cleanest. When Marcus arrived, he found a scene of controlled chaos. Dr. Thessan, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, hovered near the main diagnostic console, their light flickering in patterns that Marcus had learned to read as distress. 3 patients lay in the recovery beds, their bodies connected to machines that beeped and hummed with failing rhythms. "Marcus Chen," Dr. Thessan said, their voice like wind chimes in a storm. "I am grateful you came so quickly. The situation is dire." Marcus looked around the Medbay, his trained eyes taking in every detail. The lights were dimmer than they should be, and there was a smell in the air that he recognized all too well, the smell of burning circuits and dying electronics. The walls were lined with equipment that had been state-of-the-art perhaps 50 years ago, but now showed their age in 1,000 small ways. "Walk me through it, Doc," he said, moving to the nearest console and pulling off the access panel. "What happened and when did it start?" Dr. Thessan floated closer, their crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the walls. "It began 3 days ago with small fluctuations in the power supply. I reported it to engineering, but the previous chief said it was nothing to worry about. Yesterday, the regeneration pods began to fail one by one. This morning, the life support in this section started to degrade. I have managed to stabilize our current patients, but if the systems fail completely, they will die." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The previous chief engineer had been a Corthan named Brell who had cared more about his gambling debts than the ship's systems. He had left 3 months ago, taking a shuttle to a pleasure station and never looking back. Marcus had been promoted to fill his position, inheriting a nightmare of neglected maintenance and failing equipment. Who are the patients, he asked, not because it mattered for the repairs, but because he needed to know who he was fighting for. Dr. Thesson's light dimmed slightly, a sign of sadness. The first is Ensign Torval, a young Torvani who suffered severe radiation burns during a power surge in the cargo bay. His body is healing, but he cannot breathe unassisted yet. The second is Chief Navigator Hess, a Feskari who contracted a parasitic infection on our last stop. The treatment requires precise temperature control that only the Medbay can provide. The third is a passenger, a human child named Lily who was traveling with her father to the colony worlds. She has a rare genetic condition that requires constant medication delivered through the medical systems. Marcus turned to look at the third bed, and his heart clenched in his chest. The girl could not have been more than 7 years old, with dark hair spread across the pillow and skin so pale it seemed almost transparent. Her small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and the machines connected to her body beeped with a rhythm that was too slow, too weak. "Where is her father?" Marcus asked. "He is in the passenger quarters, trying to stay calm for his daughter's sake. I have been sending him updates every hour, but there is little good news to share." Marcus turned back to the console, his mind already working through the problem. The Medbay systems were integrated in ways that made them both efficient and fragile. Power flowed from the main grid to local batteries to the equipment itself, with backup systems that were supposed to kick in when primary systems failed. But those backups had been neglected for so long that Marcus doubted they would work at all. "I need to see the main power junction for this section," he said. "If the problem is what I think it is, we might have a chance. But I'm going to need help." Dr. Thesson's light brightened slightly. "I will assist in any way I can. What do you need?" "I need someone to monitor the patients while I work on the systems. If anything changes, anything at all, I need to know immediately. And I need you to trust me, document. Some of what I'm going to do might look crazy, but I know what I'm doing." The crystalline being pulsed with a color Marcus had never seen before. "In my 400 years of existence, I have learned that humans are capable of remarkable things when lives are at stake. I trust you, Marcus Chen. Do what you must." Marcus found the main power junction in a cramped maintenance corridor behind the Medbay. It was a mess of cables and conduits that would have given a safety inspector nightmares, but Marcus saw it differently. He saw possibilities, pathways, solutions that others might miss. His hands moved over the junction, testing connections and checking readouts on his handheld diagnostic tool. The problem was worse than he had feared. The main power relay was dying, its components burned out from years of carrying loads it was never designed to handle. The backup relay had corroded, probably from a coolant leak that no one had bothered to fix. And the emergency batteries that should have provided hours of backup power were nearly drained, their charge indicators showing red across the board. Normal protocol would be to call for help, to send a distress signal and hope that another ship was close enough to respond. But Marcus knew the reality of space travel in this sector. Help could be days away, weeks even. And the Medbay did not have days. He sat back on his heels, his mind racing through options. He could reroute power from other sections of the ship, but that would only delay the inevitable. He could try to repair the main relay, but he did not have the parts. He could charge the batteries, but the charging system itself was failing. And then, he thought of something else, something that went against every rule of Starship engineering he had ever learned. It was dangerous, possibly insane, and if it went wrong, it could kill everyone in the Medbay. But if it worked, it would buy them time, maybe enough time to reach the nearest station and get proper repairs. Marcus pulled out his communicator and called Kira. "I need you to meet me in the Medbay," he said. "And bring Captain Torvis. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Captain Torvis was an old Torvani, his blue skin faded to a pale gray and his 4 eyes clouded with age. But his mind was still sharp, and when Marcus explained his plan, those clouded eyes narrowed with something that might have been fear or might have been respect. "You want to connect the Medbay directly to the engine's secondary power core," the captain said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command. "That has never been done on a ship of this class. The power fluctuations alone could fry every piece of equipment in that room."
Marcus nodded. I know.
But, I can build a buffer system, something to regulate the power flow and protect the medical equipment.
It won't be pretty, and it won't be permanent, but it will work. I just need time and materials. Kira stepped forward, her tendrils writhing with anxiety. The secondary power core is unstable on a good day.
If something goes wrong while you are making this connection, the whole forward section could be compromised.
I know, Marcus said again.
But, what's the alternative?
We sit here and watch 3 people die because we were too afraid to try? That's not who we are. That's not who any of us should be.
The captain was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes fixed on Marcus's face. In that silence, Marcus could hear the faint beeping of the medical equipment, the soft hiss of life support struggling to keep going, the distant hum of the engines that kept them all alive. Every sound was a reminder of what was at stake.
You really believe you can do this? Captain Torvis asked.
Marcus thought of the little girl in the bed, her shallow breaths and pale skin. He thought of the young Torvani who had been burned saving cargo that was probably worthless. He thought of the navigator whose infection was eating away at her from the inside. He thought of all the times he had fixed things that should have been unfixable, all the impossible problems he had solved with nothing but his hands and his mind.
I know I can do this, he said. But, I need your permission to try.
The captain turned to look at the patients, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned back to Marcus and nodded slowly.
Do it. Whatever you need, whatever resources we have, they are yours.
But, Marcus, if something goes wrong, we will not have time to fix it.
You understand this? I understand, Marcus said.
Now, I need to get to work. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Marcus gathered every piece of usable equipment he could find, stripping parts from non-essential systems and raiding the ship's meager supply of spare components. He enlisted the help of Grix, whose forearms could hold multiple tools at once, and a young Fescari engineer named Trill whose small size allowed him to reach spaces Marcus could not. Together, they built the buffer system and the maintenance corridor behind the Medbay. It was an ugly thing, a tangle of cables and circuit boards and hand-soldered connections that looked like it might fall apart if someone sneezed too hard. But, Marcus knew that appearances could be deceiving. Under that chaotic exterior was a system that could handle power fluctuations that would destroy standard equipment. The hardest part was connecting to the secondary power core. The core was located deep in the ship's belly, in a section that was always too hot and always humming with dangerous energy. Marcus had to wear a protective suit that made his movements slow and clumsy, and he had to work in short bursts because the radiation levels were too high for prolonged exposure. But, he did it. Connection by connection, wire by wire, he built a pathway that would bring stable power to the Medbay. And, when he finally sealed the last junction and stepped back, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The connection is complete, he announced over the communicator. I'm heading back to the Medbay to test the system. Everyone, cross whatever you have that's crossable. The Medbay was quiet when he arrived, the only sounds the steady beeping of the medical equipment and the soft hum of Dr. Thesson's crystalline form. The 3 patients lay still in their beds, their lives hanging by threads that grew thinner with each passing moment. Marcus moved to the power control panel, a device he had installed just hours ago to manage the new connection. His hands were steady as he reached for the activation switch, but his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. Here goes nothing, he whispered, and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lights in the Medbay brightened, not to their full intensity but enough to chase away the shadows. The medical equipment hummed with new energy, their displays flickering as they adjusted to the different power source. The life support systems cycled through their startup procedures, fans spinning and filters cleaning and everything working the way it should. Dr. Thesson's light blazed with colors Marcus had never seen. It is working. Marcus Chen, it is actually working. The power is stable, the equipment is functioning. You have done it. Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Don't celebrate yet, document. This is a temporary fix, and we still have a long way to go before we reach a station. But, at least now we have a chance. He walked to the bed where the little girl lay, looking down at her peaceful face. The machines connected to her were working properly now, delivering the medication she needed to stay alive. Her breathing seemed slightly stronger, though Marcus knew that might just be his imagination.
Hang in there, kid, he said softly. We're going to get you home. Behind him, the door to the medbay slid open, and a man rushed in. He was human, middle-aged and haggard with worry, and he went straight to the girl's bedside. Marcus stepped back to give him space, watching as the man took his daughter's small hand and held it to his cheek. Thank you, the man said, his voice cracking. Dr. Thessan told me what you did. Thank you. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Just doing my job. She's not out of the woods yet, none of them are. But we've bought some time. The man looked up at him with eyes full of tears. You don't understand. Everyone told us this trip was too dangerous, that Lily wouldn't survive the journey. But we had no choice, the medical facilities she needs are only on the colony worlds. When the medbay started failing, I thought we had lost her. Marcus knelt down so he was at eye level with the man. Listen to me. I'm not going to let anyone die on this ship, not if I can help it. Your daughter is going to reach those colony worlds, and she's going to get the treatment she needs. I promise you that. It was a promise that Marcus had no right to make. There were still so many things that could go wrong, so many systems that could fail, so many miles of empty space between them and safety. But, looking at the little girl and her father, Marcus knew he would move heaven and earth to keep that promise. The next few days were some of the hardest of Marcus's life. The buffer system worked, but it required constant monitoring and adjustment. The secondary power core was unpredictable, its output fluctuating in ways that kept Marcus on edge every moment. He slept in short naps on the floor of the med bay, always within reach of the power control panel, always ready to make adjustments when something went wrong. And things did go wrong. The first night, a surge nearly overloaded the entire system, and Marcus had to physically disconnect the main line while Grix held the backup connection steady. The second day, a feedback loop developed that threatened to fry the regeneration pod where the young Torvani was healing. Marcus traced the problem to a faulty capacitor and replaced it with a part he had salvaged from an old entertainment console. But, through it all, the medbay stayed operational. The patients continued to heal, their vital signs growing stronger with each passing hour. The little girl began to show color in her cheeks, her medication doing its work. The navigator's infection started to respond to treatment. And the young Torvani opened his eyes for the first time, confused but alive. Word of what Marcus had done spread through the ship. Crew members who had barely spoken to him before started stopping by the med bay, offering help or just wanting to shake his hand. The captain visited twice, the second time bringing a bottle of something that burned going down but warmed the soul. You know, Captain Torvis said, pouring 2 glasses of the amber liquid, when you first came aboard this ship, I was skeptical. Humans have a reputation in this sector, not all of it good. Some say your kind is too fragile for deep space, too emotional to be reliable crew members. Marcus accepted the glass with a nod of thanks. And, now? The captain's 4 eyes crinkled and what Marcus had learned was a smile. Now I think those people are fools. In my entire career, I have never seen anyone do what you did. You looked at an impossible problem and found a solution that no one else would have even considered. That is not fragility, Marcus Chen. That is strength of a kind I am still trying to understand. Marcus sipped the drink, feeling its warmth spread through his tired body. It's just what humans do, Captain. When our backs are against the wall, when the people we care about are in danger, we find a way. It's not always pretty, and it's not always safe. But we find a way. The captain was silent for a moment, staring at the sleeping patients. The consortium will want to know how you kept this ship running long enough to reach port. They will want to replicate your methods, use them on other failing vessels. Then, let them try, Marcus said. But, they'll find that it's not just about the technical knowledge. It's about caring enough to push through when everything says you should give up. It's about seeing people instead of problems. That's not something you can write in a manual. The captain finished his drink and stood to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Marcus. Perhaps not. But it is something we can learn from, if we are wise enough to pay attention. Get some rest, Marcus Chen. You have earned it. But Marcus did not rest. He sat in the med bay, watching the monitors and listening to the soft sounds of healing. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, a station was drawing closer, a place where proper repairs could be made and the patients could receive full treatment. They were going to make it. Against all odds, they were going to make it. And Marcus Chen, the only human on a ship full of aliens, had made it possible. Not through strength or speed or any of the qualities that others might have expected from a hero. But, through something simpler, more fundamental, the stubborn refusal to accept defeat when lives were on the line. As the ship hummed around him and the stars wheeled slowly past the viewports, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. There was still work to be done, always more work to be done. But, for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The Medbay was alive, and so was everyone in it. That was all that mattered. The station appeared on the viewscreen like a glittering jewel against the black velvet of space. Kessera Station, a massive ring structure that orbited a dead world at the edge of civilized space. It was not the most advanced station in the sector, nor was it the safest, but it had something the Volantis desperately needed: a proper repair facility and a medical center that could handle the ship's ailing passengers. Marcus stood on the bridge, watching the station grow larger as they approached. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his body ached in ways that reminded him he was not as young as he used to be. But there was a quiet satisfaction in his chest, the knowledge that they had made it this far against impossible odds. Captain Torvis sat in the command chair, his old hands moving across the controls with practiced ease. The rest of the bridge crew worked at their stations, guiding the wounded ship toward the docking cradles that extended from the station like welcoming arms. Kessera Station, this is the cargo freighter Volantis requesting emergency docking clearance, Kira said into the communications array. We have 3 patients in critical condition and require immediate medical assistance. The response came back crackly and distorted, the station's aging equipment nearly as old as the Volantis itself. Volantis, this is Kessera Station Control. Emergency clearance granted. Proceed to docking cradle 7. Medical teams are standing by. Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. They were going to make it. After days of constant vigilance, of repairs and adjustments and prayers to whatever gods might be listening, they were finally going to reach safety. But, as the ship drew closer to the station, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The docking cradle they had been assigned was dark, its lights extinguished and its guide beacon silent. And, beyond it, visible through the viewports, he could see that entire sections of the station were similarly dark, like a disease spreading through the metal and glass. Captain, he said, his voice sharp with concern. Something's wrong. Torvis turned his 4 eyes toward the viewport, and Marcus saw the old Torvani's expression shift from relief to worry. I see it. Kira, ask station control what is happening. Kira spoke rapidly into the communications array, her tendrils writhing with anxiety. The response that came back was even more distorted than before, broken up by static and interference. Volantis, experiencing power failures, multiple systems spreading, cannot guarantee medical services. The message cut off, replaced by nothing but static. Kara tried to re-establish contact, but the station had gone silent, its communications array apparently failing along with everything else. Marcus felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders, the weight of responsibility and impossible choices. They had come so far, survived so much, only to find that their destination was dying just as surely as their own ship had been. Captain, he said, his mind already racing through possibilities, we need to dock anyway. If the station is having power failures, they might need help as much as we do. And our patients can't wait any longer. Torvis was silent for a long moment, his clouded eyes fixed on the failing station. Then, he nodded slowly. You are right. We have no choice. Navigator, take us in manually. Marcus, I want you ready to assist the station's engineering crews the moment we dock. The docking procedure was tense and difficult. Without the automated guidance systems, the pilot had to rely on visual cues and instinct, threading the massive ship through the cradle's framework with agonizing slowness. Marcus watched from the bridge, his hands clenched at his sides, willing the ship to slide safely into place. When the docking clamps finally engaged, the sound echoing through the hull like a sigh of relief, Marcus was already moving toward the airlock. He grabbed his toolkit from where he had left it near the door and ran through the corridors, dodging crew members who were preparing to transfer the patients. The airlock cycled open, and Marcus stepped onto the station for the first time. The air was stale and cold, colder than it should have been. The lights in the docking bay flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to move and writhe. And everywhere Marcus looked,
he saw signs of decay and neglect, rust on the bulkheads, dust on the consoles, cracks in the floor plating. A small group was waiting for him, station personnel in uniforms that had seen better days. Their faces were drawn and tired, the faces of people who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. At their head was a tall Korthan with only 3 arms, the fourth ending in a scarred stump just below the elbow. "You are the engineer from the Volantis?" the Korthan asked, his voice rough and weary.
Marcus nodded. "Marcus Chen. What's happening here?"
The Korthan let out a sound that might have been a laugh but held no humor.
"What is not happening would be a shorter list.
The station's primary power core failed 6 days ago. We have been running on backups ever since, but those are failing too. The medical center lost power completely this morning. Life support is holding, barely, but if we do not find a solution soon, everyone on this station will die." Marcus felt the familiar sensation of his mind shifting gears, moving from exhaustion to focus. This was what he did, what he had always done. When everything was falling apart, when everyone else had given up hope, Marcus Chen found a way.
"Take me to your main engineering section," he said. "Show me everything.
And, I mean everything, even the things you think are too far gone to save." The Korthan studied him for a moment, his single remaining hand clenching and unclenching. Then, he nodded and turned to lead the way.
"I am Chief Engineer Vorn. Follow me, human. And try to keep up."
The journey through the station was like walking through a graveyard of technology. They passed through sections where the lights had failed completely, navigating by the weak glow of emergency strips along the floor. They passed sealed doors behind which, Vorn explained, entire compartments had been evacuated because life support could no longer be maintained. They passed frightened faces peering through windows, station residents who had nowhere to go and no way to leave. The engineering section was located near the station's core, a massive chamber filled with machinery that hummed and groaned like a dying animal. Marcus could see immediately that the situation was even worse than Vorn had described. The primary power core, a fusion reactor that should have been the heart of the station, sat cold and dark in the center of the room. The backup generators lined the walls, coughing and sputtering as they struggled to keep up with demands they were never designed to meet. But what caught Marcus's attention was not the failing equipment. It was what the station's engineers had tried to do to save it. Everywhere he looked, he saw patches and repairs that had been done hastily and without proper materials. Cables that had been spliced together with wire meant for household use. Conduits held together by nothing more than welded scrap metal and hope.
"You've been trying to keep this running for 6 days?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the amazement out of his voice. Vorn's scarred stump twitched, a phantom reflex. "We had no choice.
The nearest other station is weeks away, and most of the ships that were docked here left when the trouble started.
We have over 3,000 people on this station, human. Families, children, elderly who cannot travel. We could not just give up." Marcus walked through the engineering section, examining each system in turn.
His mind was cataloging problems and possibilities, sorting through information faster than he could consciously process it. The primary power core was dead, its internal components burned out beyond any hope of repair. The backup generators were failing because they had been running at maximum capacity for too long without maintenance. The power distribution system was a tangled mess that was probably causing more problems than it was solving. But there was something else, something that made Marcus stop in his tracks and stare. "What is that?" he asked, pointing to a massive structure in the corner of the engineering section. It was covered in dust and forgotten machinery, clearly something that had been abandoned long ago. Vorn glanced at it and made a dismissive gesture with his good hand. "That is an old thermal conversion system from when the station was first built. It was designed to harness heat from the planet below, back when the planet still had geological activity. But the planet went cold decades ago, and the system has been useless ever since." Marcus walked toward the structure, his eyes tracing the connections and pathways that wound through its massive form. The thermal conversion system was ancient, older than anything else in the engineering section. But, as he studied it, he began to see something that others had apparently missed. "The planet is cold," he said slowly, "but space is colder. And this station generates heat, lots of it. The life support systems, the computers, the machinery. All of it produces heat that has to be vented into space anyway." Vorn's eyes widened as he began to understand what Marcus was suggesting.
You want to reverse the thermal conversion system? Use it to capture waste heat from the station and convert it back into power?
Marcus nodded, his hands already itching to start working. It's not a perfect solution, and it won't give us as much power as the fusion core did. But if we can get it running, it should be enough to stabilize life support and give us time to figure out something more permanent. But Corthan was silent for a long moment, his massive form still as stone.
Then, he let out another humorless laugh.
Human, that system has not been operational in 30 years. Half the components have been stripped for other repairs.
Even if your idea could work in theory, the practical challenges would be immense.
Marcus turned to face him, and something in his expression made the Corthan take a step back. Chief Engineer Vorn, I just spent 4 days keeping a failing medbay alive on a ship that should have been scrapped years ago. I did it with salvaged parts and jury-rigged systems and sheer stubborn refusal to let people die. If you think I'm going to walk away from this because it's difficult, then you don't know humans very well. Vorn stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his alien features. No, he said. I do not suppose I do. What do you need? The next several hours were a whirlwind of activity. Word of Marcus's plan spread through the station, and soon engineers and technicians from every department were converging on the engineering section. They came with tools and materials, with expertise and desperation, with the fierce determination of people who had been given a chance to fight back against the darkness closing in around them. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, directing teams and solving problems and making decisions faster than he had ever made them before. He worked alongside Vorn, whose 3 arms proved surprisingly useful for holding components in place while Marcus made connections. He worked with Torvani engineers whose multiple eyes could spot problems he might have missed. He worked with Fescari technicians whose small bodies could reach into spaces too tight for anyone else. And, through it all, he thought about the patients on the Volantis. He thought about Lily and her father, about the young Torvani healing from his burns, about the navigator fighting off her infection. They had been transferred to the station's medical center, such as it was, and were being cared for by the station's doctors. But, without power, even the best doctors could only do so much. The thermal conversion system slowly took shape under their combined efforts. Marcus had to improvise constantly, using parts that were never designed to work together and creating connections that existed in no engineering manual. But, piece by piece, component by component, the ancient system began to awaken. The first test was a failure. Power surged through the system and died almost immediately, a critical component unable to handle the load. Marcus traced the problem to a heat exchanger that had corroded beyond use, and he replaced it with a unit salvaged from a broken refrigeration system. The second test lasted longer, nearly 30 seconds before another component failed. Marcus fixed that one too. The third test succeeded. Power flowed from the thermal conversion system into the station's main grid, not much at first but growing steadily as the system found its equilibrium. Lights flickered on in sections that had been dark for days. Life support fans began to spin in compartments that had gone still and cold. And, in the medical center, the equipment that was keeping 3 patients alive received the power it needed to continue working. A cheer went up from the assembled engineers, a sound of relief and joy that echoed through the engineering section. Vorn clapped Marcus on the shoulder with his remaining hand, nearly knocking him off his feet. You did it, the Corthan said, wonder in his voice. By all the stars in the sky, you actually did it. Marcus leaned against a console, exhaustion finally catching up with him. We did it, he corrected. I just had the idea. Your people made it happen. Vorn shook his head. No. My people have been trying to save this station for 6 days, and we were failing. You came here and, in hours, you found a solution that none of us had even considered. That is not normal engineering, human. That is something else entirely. Marcus did not have the energy to argue. He simply nodded and pushed himself upright. The system is stable for now, but it's going to need constant monitoring and adjustment. I can show your engineers what to look for, but they'll need to be vigilant. And we should start working on a more permanent solution as soon as possible. Vorn nodded. Of course. But first, I think you should rest. You have done enough for 1 day. Marcus thought about arguing, but his body had other ideas. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, leaving behind nothing but bone-deep weariness. He allowed himself to be led to a small room near the engineering section, a space that had once been used for storage but now contained a simple cot and nothing else. He lay down on the cot, expecting to fall asleep immediately. But, instead, his mind refused to stop working. He thought about everything that had happened, from the moment Kara had called him to the Medbay to the moment the thermal conversion system had come online. He thought about the challenges that still lay ahead, the repairs that would need to be made, the problems that would inevitably arise. And he thought about something else, something that had been nagging at him since he first saw the station's failing systems. The pattern of failures, the way they had spread through the station, the specific components that had burned out. It did not look like normal wear and tear. It looked deliberate. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, Marcus needed sleep. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. He woke to the sound of alarms. Marcus was on his feet before he was fully conscious, his instincts taking over while his mind struggled to catch up. The alarms were coming from everywhere, a cacophony of warning sirens that drowned out everything else. He grabbed his toolkit and ran out of the room, nearly colliding with a station technician who was running in the opposite direction. "What's happening?" Marcus shouted over the noise. The technician's face was pale with fear. "The thermal conversion system. Something's wrong. It's overloading." Marcus ran toward the engineering section, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived, he found chaos. Engineers were rushing around, trying to shut down systems and contain damage. Sparks flew from consoles, and smoke filled the air with an acrid smell that burned Marcus's throat. Vorn was at the main control panel, his 3 arms moving frantically over the controls. It came out of nowhere, he shouted when he saw Marcus. One moment the system was stable, the next it started drawing more power than it could handle. Marcus pushed through the crowd to reach the panel, his eyes scanning the readouts. What he saw made his blood run cold. The thermal conversion system was not just overloading, it was actively being pushed beyond its limits. And the push was coming from inside the station. "Someone is doing this deliberately," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Someone is sabotaging the system." Vorn stared at him. "That is impossible. Who would want to destroy their own station?" Marcus did not have an answer for that. But he knew what he had to do. He turned away from the main panel and started tracing the power feeds, looking for the source of the overload. It took him precious minutes, minutes in which the system continued to strain and groan, threatening to tear itself apart at any moment. And then, he found it. There was a secondary connection to the thermal conversion system, a pathway that should not have existed. It was hidden behind a panel that had been welded shut, and it was drawing massive amounts of power from the system, more than any legitimate station function could possibly need. "Vorn!" Marcus shouted. "I need to cut this connection, but I don't know what it's feeding into. It could be critical systems, or it could be nothing at all." The Korthan appeared beside him, his eyes widening as he saw the hidden connection. "That is not part of any station schematic I have ever seen. Cut it. Whatever it is powering cannot be more important than preventing the system from destroying itself." Marcus grabbed his cutters and severed the connection. The effect was immediate. The overload alarms began to quiet, the strain on the thermal conversion system easing as the unauthorized power drain disappeared. Within minutes, the system had stabilized, and the engineering section fell silent except for the normal hum of machinery. But now Marcus had a new problem. Someone on this station was working against them, sabotaging systems and putting lives at risk. And until he found out who and why, no repair he made would be safe. He looked at Vorn, his expression grim. "We need to find where that connection was going," he said. "And we need to do it now, before whoever is behind this tries something else." Vorn nodded, his own expression hardening. "Agreed. I know this station better than anyone. If there is something hidden here, I will find it." Together, they began to trace the severed connection, following its path through the station's infrastructure. The hidden pathway wound through maintenance corridors and unused compartments, avoiding all the main thoroughfares and monitored areas. Whoever had installed it knew the station well, knew how to move through it without being seen. The trail led them deep into the station's lower levels, sections that had been abandoned years ago when the population declined. The air down here was thin and cold, the life support barely functioning. Marcus could see his breath misting in front of his face as they walked, and he found himself shivering despite his coveralls. Finally, they arrived at a door that should not have been there. It was new, recently installed based on the lack of dust and corrosion. And it was sealed with a lock that neither Marcus nor Vorn had ever seen before. "Stand back," Marcus said, pulling a plasma cutter from his toolkit.
"I'm going to open this the hard way."
The lock resisted for nearly a minute before finally giving way, its components melting under the intense heat of the cutter. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing what lay beyond. It was a laboratory of some kind, filled with equipment that Marcus did not recognize. Screens displayed data in languages he could not read, and machines hummed with power that should have been impossible given the station's failing systems. In the center of it all was a chair, restraints on its arms and legs, surrounded by devices that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. And, sitting at a console, staring at them with an expression of cold fury, was a figure in a dark uniform. It was a Torvani, but unlike any Torvani Marcus had ever seen. Its blue skin was covered in strange markings, and its four eyes burned with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. "You should not have come here," the figure said, its voice echoing oddly in the confined space. "You should have let the station die." Marcus stepped forward, his plasma cutter still in his hand. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "This is the future, human. Or it was, until you interfered. Do you have any idea what you have done? The experiment was almost complete. A few more days of power failure, a few more deaths, and we would have had the data we needed." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. "You killed people. You deliberately sabotaged this station and killed innocent people for an experiment?" The figure waved a dismissive hand. "They were already dying. The station was failing long before we arrived. We simply accelerated the process to gather data on societal collapse in isolated populations. The scientific value is immeasurable." Vorn let out a roar of fury and lunged at the figure, but Marcus grabbed his arm and held him back. "Don't. We need answers first." The figure laughed. "Answers? You want answers? Here is your answer, human. The galaxy is full of species who are weak, who cannot adapt, who will fall when pressure is applied. We are conducting research to determine which species are worth preserving and which should be allowed to extinction. This station was merely a test case." Marcus felt cold despite his anger. "And humans? Are we on your list of species worth preserving?" The figure's expression changed, becoming something almost like curiosity. "Humans are interesting. You were not supposed to be here. Our calculations did not account for your presence. And yet you have done something that none of our models predicted. You saved this station." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked on the figure's face. "Yeah, we have a habit of doing that. And I'm going to give you a piece of advice, free of charge. Whatever species you are, whatever organization you work for, you should probably update your models. Because humans don't give up. We don't accept death when there's even a chance of survival. And when we find people who think they can play God with other lives, we tend to take that personally." The figure's smile faded. "You are making a mistake, human. We have resources beyond your comprehension. If you interfere further, you will regret it." Marcus smiled back, and there was no warmth in his expression either. "Maybe. But you've already shown your hand. You've revealed that you're not invincible, that your plans can be disrupted by one human with a toolkit and a stubborn streak. And now the station knows you're here. The consortium knows you're here. By the time this is over, everyone in this sector will know what you tried to do. So go ahead and threaten me. But remember, when you're writing your report about how this experiment failed, you can put my name at the top. Marcus Chen. Remember it." The figure stared at him for a long moment, its four eyes unreadable. Then, without warning, it pressed a button on the console behind it. The room filled with blinding light, and, when Marcus's vision cleared, the figure was gone. A hidden escape pod, probably, launched into space before anyone could react. Marcus stood in the empty laboratory, surrounded by abandoned equipment and the ghosts of whatever horrors had been committed here. He knew that this was not over, that whoever or whatever that figure represented would be back. But, for now, the station was safe.
the people were alive. And Marcus had a lot more work to do. He turned to Vorn, who was still trembling with suppressed rage. We need to document everything in this room before we shut it down. And we need to warn everyone about what we've found. Can you handle that? The Korthan took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm down. Yes. I can handle it. But, Marcus, what about the station? There may be more sabotage, more hidden systems we have not found yet. Marcus nodded grimly. I know. Which is why I'm going to go over every system on this station personally. If there's anything else they've done, I'll find it. And then, I'm going to fix it, just like I've fixed everything else. He walked out of the laboratory, his mind already turning to the challenges ahead. The station was saved, but the battle was far from over. And Marcus Chen, the human mechanic who had never known when to quit, was just getting started. The news of what Marcus and Vorn had discovered spread through Kessera Station like fire through dry grass. Within hours, everyone knew about the secret laboratory, about the sabotage, about the mysterious figure who had escaped into the darkness of space. Fear and anger mixed together in equal measure, creating an atmosphere that crackled with tension. Marcus spent those first hours after the discovery moving through the station's systems like a ghost. He checked every junction, every relay, every component he could reach. And he found more hidden connections, more sabotage waiting to happen. Some were simple, timers set to trigger failures at predetermined moments. Others were more complex, feedback loops designed to cascade through multiple systems and cause maximum damage. He disabled them all, one by one, working with a methodical patience that surprised even himself. Each discovery was documented, each sabotaged component photographed and catalogued. By the time he was finished, Marcus had accumulated evidence of a systematic campaign to destroy the station and everyone on it. The station's administrator, a elderly Feskari named Counselor Mira, called an emergency meeting in the main assembly hall. Marcus was asked to attend, along with Vorn and the other senior engineers who had helped save the station. The hall was packed with station residents, their wings and tendrils and various appendages filling every available space. Counselor Mira stood at the podium, her compound eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of fear and determination. Citizens of Kessera Station, she began, her voice amplified by the hall speakers, we have been through a terrible ordeal. Many of you lost loved ones during the power failures. Many more came close to death before our systems were restored. And now we have learned that this tragedy was not an accident, but a deliberate attack. A murmur ran through the crowd, angry voices rising and falling like waves. Counselor Mira raised a hand for silence. We do not yet know who is responsible for this attack, or why they targeted our station. But we do know one thing. We survived. Against all odds, we survived because of the courage and ingenuity of the people in this room. And I would like to recognize one individual in particular, a man who was not even supposed to be on this station, but who chose to help us anyway. She turned to look at Marcus, who was standing near the back of the hall, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. Marcus Chen, will you please come forward? Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. He had never been comfortable with attention, had always preferred to do his work quietly and let the results speak for themselves. But he could not refuse this request, not in front of all these people who had fought beside him. He walked to the front of the hall, his boots echoing on the metal floor. When he reached the podium, Counselor Mira extended one of her delicate hands in greeting. Marcus Chen, she said, on behalf of every person on this station, I want to thank you for what you have done. You arrived here with a failing ship and patients in need of care. Instead of focusing solely on your own problems, you chose to help us with ours. You found a solution that none of us had considered, and you worked tirelessly to implement it. Without you, this station would be dead, and so would everyone on it. The crowd erupted in applause, a thunderous sound that seemed to shake the very walls of the assembly hall. Marcus stood there, uncomfortable and overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with his hands or where to look. I didn't do it alone, he said when the applause finally died down. Chief Engineer Vorn and his team worked just as hard as I did. The engineers from my ship helped with the repairs. Everyone on this station contributed in some way. This wasn't a victory for any one person, it was a victory for all of us. Counselor Mira nodded. True. But it was you who saw what others could not see. It was you who refused to give up when giving up would have been the easier choice. That is something we will not forget.
The meeting continued with discussions of security measures, repair priorities, and plans for investigating the attack. Marcus listened with half an ear, his mind wandering to other concerns. The patients from the Volantis were still in the medical center, still dependent on the power systems he had helped restore. He needed to check on them, to make sure they were recovering as expected. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus slipped out of the hall and made his way to the medical center. The corridors were brighter now, the lights functioning at nearly full capacity thanks to the thermal conversion system. Station residents nodded to him as he passed, some reaching out to touch his arm or shake his hand. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he understood its source. These people had been living in fear for days, watching their world slowly die around them. The fact that they had been saved felt like a miracle, and they needed someone to focus their gratitude on. The medical center was busy when he arrived, doctors and nurses moving between patients with renewed energy. The power restoration had allowed them to treat injuries and illnesses that had been neglected during the crisis, and they were working overtime to catch up. Marcus found Dr. Thessan near the entrance, the crystalline being's light flickering with what Marcus had learned to recognize as happiness. "Marcus Chen," Dr. Thessan said, floating toward him.
"I was hoping you would come. I have good news about our patients."
Marcus felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease.
"Tell me."
The doctor led him through the medical center, past rows of beds filled with recovering patients.
"Ensign Torval's burns are healing faster than expected. The regeneration treatment is working perfectly now that we have stable power. He should be ready to return to duty within a week."
They stopped at the first bed, where the young Torvani lay with his eyes closed, his blue skin showing the faint patterns of healing tissue. Marcus watched him breathe, steady and strong, and felt a surge of relief. "Chief Navigator Hess's infection has been completely eliminated," Dr. Thessan continued.
"The treatment required precise temperature control, which we could not maintain during the power failures.
But, once the systems stabilized, the parasites were destroyed within hours. She is already asking when she can return to her post." They moved to the second bed, where the Feskari navigator was awake and watching them approach. Her compound eyes glittered with intelligence and humor. "You are the human everyone is talking about," she said, her wings rustling against the bed. "The one who saved the station." Marcus shook his head.
"I just fixed some machines."
"The doctors saved you." Hess laughed, a chittering sound that was surprisingly pleasant.
"False modesty does not suit you, Marcus Chen.
I have heard the stories. You did things that should have been impossible.
Accept the praise.
You have earned it." Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and moved on to the third bed. This was the one he had been most worried about, the one that had driven him harder than any of the others. Lily was sitting up in her bed, her dark hair combed and her cheeks showing a healthy pink color that had been absent before. Her father sat beside her, holding her hand and watching Marcus approach with eyes full of gratitude.
"Mr. Chen," the father said, standing and extending his hand. "I don't know how to thank you."
The doctor said that if the power had failed for even another hour, Lily might not have made it.
"You saved her life."
Marcus shook the man's hand, feeling the strength of his grip, the desperate gratitude in his touch.
"I'm just glad she's okay. How are you feeling, Lily?"
The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes.
"Better. The medicine doesn't make me feel as sick anymore. The doctor says I'm getting stronger."
Marcus knelt down so he was at her eye level.
"That's good to hear. You're going to be fine, kid.
You're going to make it to those colony worlds and get the treatment you need, and you're going to grow up to do amazing things." Lily smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds.
"Are you coming with us?"
"My dad says you're the best mechanic he's ever seen."
"Our new ship is going to need someone to fix things."
Marcus was taken aback by the question. He had not thought about what would happen after the immediate crisis was resolved. His ship, the Volantis, would need extensive repairs before it could travel again. His place had always been there, among its familiar corridors and jury-rigged systems. But, looking at Lily's hopeful face, he found himself hesitating.
"I don't know," he said honestly. "I need to talk to my captain and see what the plan is.
But, no matter where I end up, I'll make sure you get where you're going safely."
Lily's father put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. If there's ever anything we can do for you, Mr. Chen, anything at all, please let us know. We owe you more than we can ever repay. Marcus stood and nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He excused himself and left the medical center, his mind churning with thoughts he could not quite organize. He walked through the station's corridors without any particular destination, letting his feet carry him where they would. Eventually, he found himself at a viewport overlooking the dead planet below. The surface was gray and lifeless, a world that had once been vibrant but was now nothing more than a ball of rock and ice. And yet, in orbit around the dead world, thousands of people continued to live and work and hope for better days. You look troubled, human. Marcus turned to find Captain Torvis standing behind him, the old Torvani's 4 eyes reflecting the cold light from the viewport. He had not heard the captain approach. Just thinking, Marcus said. It's been a long few days. Torvis moved to stand beside him, gazing out at the planet below. It has indeed. I have just finished meeting with the station administrator. She asked me to extend her personal thanks to you once again. I told her that thanks were unnecessary, that you were simply doing what humans do. But I do not think she understood. Marcus smiled slightly. I'm not sure I understand myself, Captain. I just see problems that need solving and people who need help. The rest happens on its own. The captain was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. I have been captain of the Volantis for 40 years. In that time, I have served with hundreds of crew members from dozens of species. But I have never served with a human until you. When you first came aboard, I was skeptical. Humans have a reputation in this sector for being emotional, unpredictable, reckless. I thought you would be a liability. Marcus said nothing, waiting for the captain to continue. I was wrong, Torvis said. You are emotional, but your emotions drive you to help others rather than harm them. You are unpredictable, but your unpredictability leads to solutions that no one else would consider. You are reckless, but your recklessness saves lives instead of risking them. You have changed my understanding of what humans are capable of. Marcus looked at the old Torvani, surprised by the emotion in his voice. Captain, I'm just a mechanic. I fix broken things because that's what I know how to do. Torvis shook his head. No. You are more than that. You see the potential in things that others have given up on. You see the value in people who others have dismissed. That is not just mechanical skill, Marcus Chen. That is a kind of wisdom that most beings never achieve in their entire lives. Marcus did not know what to say to that. He turned back to the viewport, watching the stars will slowly pass as the station continued its eternal orbit. The Volantis needs repairs, he said finally. Major repairs that will take weeks, maybe months. I don't know if the consortium will authorize the expense. Torvis made a sound that might have been a sigh. The consortium has been notified of what happened here. They are sending a representative to assess the situation. I expect they will want to scrap the Volantis and transfer our cargo to another ship. Marcus felt a pang of sadness at the thought. The Volantis was an old ship, a broken ship, but it was his home. He had spent 3 years learning its systems, fixing its problems, keeping it alive against all odds. The idea of watching it be torn apart for salvage was almost more than he could bear. And, if they do, he asked. Torvis was silent for a moment. Then, we find new ships, new positions. Life goes on. But, I want you to know, Marcus, that whatever happens, I consider it an honor to have served with you. And, if I ever captain another ship, I will make sure there is a place for you on it. Marcus nodded, touched by the captain's words. Thank you, Captain. That means a lot. They stood together in silence, watching the stars and contemplating the uncertain future. After a while, Torvis excused himself to handle ship business, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Marcus stayed at the viewport for a long time, watching the station turn beneath him. He thought about everything that had happened, from the failing Medbay to the sabotaged station to the mysterious figure who had escaped into the void. He thought about the patients he had helped save, about Lily and her father and their hopes for a new life on the colony worlds. He thought about the crew of the Volantis, the family he had found among strangers. And he thought about the future, about what might come next. The figure who had sabotaged the station was still out there somewhere, part of an organization that had resources and reach beyond anything Marcus could imagine.
They had been conducting experiments on station populations, treating living beings like data points to be collected and discarded. Marcus did not know if he could stop them, did not know if anyone could. But he knew that he would try. His communicator buzzed against his hip, and he pulled it free to check the message. It was from Vorn, asking him to return to the engineering section. There was another problem, something with the power distribution network that needed immediate attention. Marcus smiled grimly and pushed away from the viewport. There was always another problem, always another crisis waiting to unfold. That was the nature of life in space, the constant battle against entropy and decay. But it was also what made life worth living, the knowledge that every day brought new challenges to overcome and new opportunities to help others. He walked through the corridors of Kessera Station, past people who nodded and smiled and called out his name. They saw him as a hero, a savior who had pulled them back from the brink of destruction. Marcus did not feel like a hero. He felt like what he had always been, a mechanic who fixed broken things because someone had to. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could really be, someone who saw problems and solved them, who saw pain and tried to ease it, who saw darkness and brought light. The galaxy was full of grand ideologies and cosmic forces, but, at the end of the day, it was the small acts of kindness and competence that held everything together. Marcus reached the engineering section and found Vorn waiting for him, a diagnostic tablet in one hand and a worried expression on his face. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked. Vorn handed him the tablet. "The thermal conversion system is working better than expected, generating more power than we initially calculated. But the surplus is causing fluctuations in the distribution network. Nothing dangerous yet, but if we don't address it soon, we could have brownouts in critical systems." Marcus studied the tablet, his mind already working on solutions. This was a good problem, the kind that came from success rather than failure. They had so much power now that they could not distribute it properly. It was almost laughable after everything they had been through. "We need to install additional regulators in the main power lines," he said. "And we should probably set up a secondary distribution node to handle the overflow." "Do we have the components?" Vorn nodded. "The station has a reasonable supply of standard components. Nothing fancy, but it should be enough for what you are describing." Marcus handed back the tablet and rolled up his sleeves. "Then, let's get to work. Show me where the main power lines are routed, and we'll start from there." They worked through the rest of the day and into the night, installing regulators and rerouting power feeds and solving a dozen small problems that arose along the way. Other engineers joined them, learning from Marcus's techniques and contributing their own expertise. By the time they finished, the power distribution network was running smoother than it had in years, and the station's systems were more stable than anyone could remember. Marcus finally allowed himself to rest in the small room that had become his temporary quarters. He lay on the cot, every muscle in his body aching, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new lives to save. But, for now, in this moment, everything was quiet. He thought about the little girl in the medical center, healing from a condition that had seemed hopeless. He thought about the station residents who had faced death and survived. He thought about his crew on the Volantis, waiting to learn what the future held for them and their old ship. And he thought about himself, about who he was and who he wanted to be. He had spent his whole life fixing broken things, taking what was damaged and making it whole again. It was not glamorous work, and it rarely brought recognition or reward. But it mattered. Every life saved, every system restored, every problem solved was a victory against the darkness. Marcus closed his eyes and let sleep take him. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its challenges and opportunities. But tonight, he could rest. Tonight, he had earned it. In the darkness of space, the station continued its orbit, a small island of light and life in the vast emptiness between the stars. Its people slept and worked and hoped, their futures secured by the efforts of one human mechanic who had refused to let them fall. And somewhere out there, among the countless stars and worlds that made up the galaxy, forces were moving, plans were being made, and a reckoning was approaching. But that was a story for another day. For now, Marcus slept the deep sleep of the exhausted, his hands still stained with grease and his mind still churning with solutions to problems that had not yet appeared. He was not a hero, not in the traditional sense. He was simply a man who fixed broken things. And, in a universe full of broken things, that made him more valuable than gold. The consortium representative arrived 3 days after the power crisis was resolved. Her name was Director Valia Strand, and she came aboard Kessera Station with an entourage of assistants and a cold expression that suggested she had never smiled in her entire life. She was human, which surprised Marcus, one of the few humans he had encountered in this sector besides himself. Director Strand summoned the senior officers of the Volantis to a meeting room in the station's administrative section. Marcus was included in the summons, though he was not sure why. He was just the chief engineer of a failing cargo freighter, not the kind of person who usually attended meetings with consortium directors. The meeting room was small and Spartan, with metal walls and a single viewport that looked out on the stars. Director Strand sat at the head of a rectangular table, her assistants flanking her like guards. Captain Torvis sat across from her, with Kara at his side and Marcus taking a seat at the far end of the table. Captain Torvis, Director Strand began, her voice as cold as her expression. The consortium has reviewed your reports regarding the Volantis and the situation on Kessera Station. We have some concerns. Torvis's 4 eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of concerns? The director slid a tablet across the table. The Volantis was scheduled for decommissioning 2 years ago. The only reason it remained in service was because there was a shortage of cargo vessels in this sector. But, its maintenance costs have exceeded projections by over 300%, and its cargo delivery record has been increasingly unreliable. The consortium believes it is time to retire the vessel permanently. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had known this was coming, had prepared himself for it, but hearing the words spoken aloud was still painful. With respect, Director, Torvis said, the Volantis has completed every delivery assigned to it for the past 3 years. Our reliability issues were caused by factors beyond our control, including the station crisis we just helped resolve. Director Strand's expression did not change. The consortium is aware of your ship's role in the station crisis. That is one of the reasons I am here personally, rather than simply sending a decommissioning order. We have questions about the methods used to restore power to the station. She turned her cold gaze toward Marcus. Chief Engineer Chen, I understand you were primarily responsible for the repairs. Can you explain how you achieved results that our own engineering teams considered impossible? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I just looked at the problem from a different angle, Director. The thermal conversion system was designed to capture heat from geological activity. I realized it could be reversed to capture waste heat from the station itself. It wasn't complicated, just unconventional. The director studied him for a long moment. Unconventional is an understatement, Chief Engineer. The method you employed violated at least 17 standard engineering protocols. If it had failed, you could have destroyed the entire station. Marcus met her gaze steadily. If I hadn't tried, the station would have died anyway. Sometimes you have to take risks when lives are at stake. Director Strand's expression flickered, something almost like respect passing across her features before it was replaced by the familiar coldness. The consortium does not approve of unauthorized risk-taking. However, in this case, the results speak for themselves. The station is operational, and several thousand lives were saved. The consortium has decided to overlook the protocol violations. She turned back to Captain Torvis. Which brings me to my next point. The consortium has been conducting an investigation into the sabotage you discovered. We have identified the organization responsible. The room went silent. Marcus leaned forward, his attention suddenly focused. They call themselves the Calibration, Director Strand continued. They are a scientific collective that believes in accelerating the decline of what they consider inferior species and civilizations. They conduct experiments on isolated populations, measuring responses to crisis situations and collecting data on survival rates. Kessera Station was one of their test sites. How long have you known about them? Marcus asked, unable to keep the anger out of his voice. The director's gaze remained steady. The consortium has been aware of the calibration for approximately 18 months. They operate in the spaces between major powers, targeting stations and colonies that are too remote to receive rapid assistance. This is the first time we have had direct evidence of their activities. And what is the consortium doing about them? Torvis demanded. Director Strand's expression hardened. That is classified information.
What I can tell you is that the consortium is taking the threat seriously. We have assets moving into this sector to investigate further. And we have a proposal for you, Captain. She opened another tablet and began to read. The Volantis is being officially